Okay, now it's time to wrap our shell. And if you'll notice, I have taken off our brown tape that I used to close this shell up, and I've replaced it with a gum tape. And that's what we're going to be using to cover the shell with today, is the gum tape. Now, it's going to take us 10 layers to get this to the proper thickness. And there's going to be a pattern to this, so you have to be kind of careful wrapping it so we can get a consistent thickness all the way around. Now, the circumference of this shell, a 5-inch one, is 5.75 inches. The inside diameter of our mortar is going to be 4.95, and so we're going to have to make sure that we don't grow this thing over till it's larger than will fit in the tube. So we've got a ways to go to reach that maximum of 15.7, which we don't want to go quite that big, but this shell is currently 14 5/8 inch. So we've got quite a ways to go before we have to worry about exceeding the size of it. But 10 layers of the tape and the quick match running up the side, it will still fit in properly in the tube. So anyway, there is a pattern to wrapping these, and I have taken our shell and I have drawn mark on the edge of where our hemis join together. That's going to be one of our axes. The second axis is just going to be across the shell in this direction, and this is going to help us determine where to wrap this. And you alternate each layer, so I'll show you how that goes. But the spillet I'm going to leave covered here, and I've left it sticking up a little bit so that when we're finished we can kind of tell where this thing is, because we're going to have to open this back up to insert our time fuse. And if we were actually wrapping this on a machine, I would flush cut this, and we would actually stick a little magnet down in there, and then when we were finished wrapping it, we could run another magnet over the top and it would stick to wherever this point is. So that's the way we would determine where the spillet is. But in this circumstance, we're going to just leave it sticking up a little bit. Now I've got our sponge wet with water here, and the gum tape has a shiny side and a dull side. The shiny side is actually our glue, and that's going to be activated with water. And so I'm going to take the tape and just set it on top of the sponge, hold it down, and just pull it through, and that saturates our tape. And we're going to start by running our tape along the axis that we established there, and we're going to try to make sure this sticks good, and we'll come back in a minute and we'll actually burnish it to smooth it out. So that's covering axis 1, and actually we've already got, with that tape around there to hold it closed, we've got a piece there, but I'll go ahead and add another one to show. And so that is tape around both of those axes. And you'll notice that it leaves a little wedge here that's not covered, and depending on how size that is and the tape size, we're going to have to cover this up next, and so size is going to depend on how many pieces it takes to do that. But we'll actually be covering, with one pass, we'll be covering this wedge on this side and the wedge on the opposite side. So let me show you what I mean. We'll wet our tape and we'll start by covering that space, wrap it around. You can see I'm actually covering the back space at the same time. All right, so it's going to take 3 pieces to cover this. Okay, so that's 2 of those covered. We'll rotate it around. Do the next ones. We'll worry about getting this smooth in a minute. And you'll notice I'm also using our little coupling here to help set this so it's not rolling around on our table. Okay, so that completely covers our shell. That will be layer number 1. I'm going to take another coupling here, and we're going to use it to burnish as we go. Okay, so you can see that's pretty well burnished there. If you end up with a spot that doesn't stick well, where the edge of your tape is dried out, you can always just stick it directly on the sponge there to wet it. And you can see, we can clearly see where our split is. Alright, so that is layer 1. Now, before we had our axis here across where the shells join together. Now what we're going to have, we're going to change the axis up for the next layer. And this time, instead of going around this part, we're going to go across in this direction for one axis and then this direction for the second axis. So that's the directions we're going to wrap this time. And these will alternate from layer to layer. So you've really got to pay attention to what you're doing. And also it gets harder to see where you've wrapped it, so you really have to pay attention. Alright, so what we'll do now is we will try to tape using those for our axis. Okay. Okay, so now you can see here's our wedges again. So we're just going to cover those each, and then we will start back using the old axis, or the previous axis. So that's how we're going to alternate these and continue doing this until we get 10 layers. Now the tape's available in multitude of sizes, so depending on the size of shell is kind of which size you want to use. You don't want it too wide because it wrinkles really bad and it's hard to burnish. If you get it too small, it takes so much longer to do. Okay, so that completes level 2. We'll go ahead and burnish that. Okay, so there's an area that dried out before it got stuck down. So we just re-wet it. Okay, there it is, layer 2. So we're going to continue doing this until we get our 10 layers. And you know, like everything else with the fireworks, it's time consuming, but it's relaxing at the same time, so it's a nice little project here to do. Now, once we complete this, I'll put it in my drying box, and we'll dry this completely, and then we'll put our time fuse and our lift on it. So let me continue doing this off camera. I'll come back when it's complete, and I'll show you what it looks like at that point. Okay? All right, be right back. Okay, here it is, 10 layers. And it ends up, the circumference ends up being about 15 1/4, something like that. So we put quite a lot on there. So it was 10 layers and about 8 wraps per layer, or 8 strips. So that's 80, and they're around 17 inches each. So that ends up being about 112 feet of tape that it took to do this. And I always forget this. I haven't hand wrapped in a long time. I always forget this, and it always gets me. It'll get a little lumpy here. You have a tendency to, or I do, I have a tendency to start at the same place every time. So like I'll lap it over here at the top. And so I do the same thing for every one of them, and it ends up, if you're not careful and alternate a little bit where you put that, join them, then you'll end up with a little more lumps in it. So I've got a little bit of that going on. I think that's what that was from. But anyway, it'll be fine. Should still fit in the mortar really good, and it looks pretty good. So we'll let that thing dry. I'll put it in my drying box and let it dry for quite a while, and then we'll come back and I'll show you how to put the time fuse in and put the leaders on it. So, oh, and you can see exactly where that split was. So, and if you forget that step and do it flush, you'll be in trouble trying to find that place to make your hole for your time fuse. So anyway, that's it. I appreciate you watching, and stay tuned for the next one where we basically finish the shell. So all right, thank you.